I always have canvases. I have one in my car right now. I don't know why. One thing that I always say is that there's no rules to painting. This is my typical artist setup. I've got an easel with my pre-sketched canvas. I can sit here and I can tell you what I do all day, and I would be happy to, but at the end of the day, whatever you put on that canvas is a piece of artwork. What I have here is a simple sketch. Any sketch, the purpose of it is only to guide you while you're painting. So whatever marks you need to make in order to make the painting process simple and effective for you is how you should do it. You're gonna mess up probably, I mess up still, but it's okay because there's no rules. I'm going to be putting a variety of colors onto the palette because you never know when you're gonna want a little bit of red or a little bit of green that you maybe wouldn't think that you need. I like oil. I like the luxury of it, I think, because it is quote unquote the master's medium, but I also like the blendability of it. You can change the thickness and the thinness of oil paint in a way that you cannot really do with acrylic. When you're creating a portrait, you want to focus most of the detail in one area and sort of soften the focus as you go out, because that mimics the way the human eye would view a person. Typically, I want that focus to be centered on the eyes. My work is inspired by people that I know, people that I've met briefly, people that I've known for a very long time, and it's constantly evolving. First things first, we go into the pupil and the iris, which in the case of this portrait, both appear really, really dark. There's something in my head that I'm trying to make a tangible object, and sometimes I don't get it right. And you know, you have two options there. You either run with whatever you have created, or you start over and you do it until you get it right. The white part of her eye is going to have a gradient on it because it is a sphere. Start with a base of white, and then I have this color, which I believe is called violet gray. As we're mixing it, you can kind of see that it's not white, and it doesn't look like the color you would imagine the white of a person's eye to be. And then I'm gonna take a tiny bit of black, so we have sort of a cool purple gray. It's not gonna be a solid color, it's going to be blended. So we'll start with the darkest shade. To create the lighter shade, we're just gonna use very slight variations of the same color. And I'm gonna bring the white right up to the iris. When you're coating the brush, you really don't need very much paint. It's better to start with less and layer on. And you always want your highlights to be the last layer that you put on. I like to lay the highlights of the eyes on kind of thick. I want it to be lighter in value than the whites of the eye, still not pure white. And one thing about oil paint that I personally like is the workability of it. So I can easily change the color that I've already laid down. Other mediums such as acrylic, sometimes it's more difficult to do that. You sort of have to nail the color the first time. I want to use the biggest brush possible for the space that I'm trying to paint. I wouldn't be this detail oriented on the entire face because, like I said, you want to focus on one aspect of the painting more than others. And you can be messier with the darker colors because you're eventually going to go back over them with the lighter colors. You have to be careful with oil paints because it's very easy to make mistakes, and I have definitely had my fair share. I was doing a show. The gallery that I was showing with was like, okay, we need 3 huge paintings by like next week. It was 5 feet by 4 feet oil painting. I did it the night before the show. I knew that it was going to be wet hanging in the gallery, but that meant that I had to transport it to the gallery without messing up the paint at all, which I didn't somehow, but it was a little stressful. As I'm moving towards the center of this eyelid, I'm gonna be getting lighter and lighter in value. I do try to keep variety in the tones that I'm using because that's just how skin tones are. They're not even. No one has perfectly even skin. Some of the main things that I think you have to think about when you're painting is, one, color. That's something that's like a big adjustment when you're coming from drawing to painting, is mixing color. The tones of colors, the hues of colors. There's such a vast amount of colors to choose from. Figuring out which ones are right for what you're trying to do is really important. Thinking of human faces as geometric objects, or thinking of anything in nature as the shapes that it is at its core, makes it a lot easier to get the colors and the shading right. It's a little bit of an adjustment to learn to think that way, but once you get used to it, it really ups the quality of your painting. I'm liking the way that the purples in her eyes are coming out. By the time I put in her more like golden yellow skin tone, it's really gonna make her eyes pop. The basic rule of value when it comes to painting portraits is that the lightest areas of the feature are going to be the parts of the feature that are closest to the light. It's really helpful to understand light and the way that light bounces off of shapes. We're kind of getting to the point where the top lid and the bottom lid blend together. So I'm sort of just going to dip around the colors that I've already created on this palette because I know that they're all cohesive on this eye, and I'm just going to use the colors that I've already made and fill in some of these blank spaces. While I do focus on the geometric shapes of nature, you also have to be aware that nature is very organic in shape. There's very few like straight, harsh lines. Everything is pretty gradient and soft. The only things left would be the eyebrow and the eyelashes. Definitely don't want to make them too long or too dark because eyelashes are not as pronounced as I think people often think they are. I think it's like the final touch, and it does bring a portrait to life a little bit. My portraits, I want them to be emotional, not in a super obvious way, and just kind of capturing the uniqueness of a human. So I've already made a black line in the part of her lips, which is one of the only places on a face that typically is purely black. Definitely encourage people to try to think of the lips as shapes rather than as a flat feature on the face. The next darkest part is always going to be these two outer corners of the lips. So for that, we're going to stick with our black and add some reds, which is a tone that we've already experimented with. We're going to stay pretty dark though, because this is going to be the darkest part that we place. And there's usually just a little triangle of shadow in people's lips. The ultimate goal with painting, at least for me, is to be able to use your brush as efficiently as possible. You can already sort of see the shape of her lip taking place. And then I'm gonna add some orange to the red that I've already used for the highlight, because I certainly don't want to use a white highlight here. And you can see that using oranges and yellows is a really good way to lighten a color without adding white. Oftentimes, one of the darkest parts of the face is the shadow directly underneath the lower lip, and that's because of the projection of some people's lower lips over their chin, and you get a small shadow. This side of the lip is going to be darker. It's going to be a little bit more on the purple side, similar to the top lip. You usually have a transition color between the lip and the skin because they sort of gradient into each other on the face. Burnt umber is really good for darkening difficult colors because black can be so overpowering and brown can just cool down a color enough to where it appears to be darker. Sort of feathering it in. Lips have a lot of creases in them, and that's something that we want to highlight when we're painting them. And then I'm going to bring a little bit of pink to the center of her lips, adding some of those creases in the lips just by doing some vertical lines. And you can get as detailed as you want on the lips because there are so many fine lines and wrinkles in people's lips that you can really go crazy. I want to keep it a little bit loose. One thing that's important when you're developing a style is what shape of brushes, and more importantly, what shape of brush stroke you lay down, because the shape of the stroke is what sort of defines your style and defines your painting at the end of the day. So being aware of that and being conscious of that when you're buying brushes and when you're playing with them, I think is important. Noses are not particularly important for expression, and therefore they're not particularly important to get in as much detail. When a person is looking at someone's face, they're typically looking either at the eyes or the mouth, and the nose is never really in focus of someone's view. So to paint it really, really detailed is a little bit counterproductive to creating a realistic portrait. When you're looking for something to paint or something to focus on when you're painting, make sure it's something that really speaks to you, because by painting something that really moves you, you're gonna get a better product in the end. The key to hair is to maintain the direction of the hair and to layer your highlights on. If you're really trying to create a detailed portrait, a good way to do that is to really go in there with a tiny brush and do little hair strokes. I do like to do the hair before I do the skin sometimes because I like to have the darkness to offset the skin tone, because it makes the skin tone look a little bit more accurate as to how it's going to look in the end. The ear is one place where you can really kind of loosen up and lay your strokes down freely. By having a good ear, you can really up the quality of your portrait. A lot of times I do simplify the tones in the ear to the 3 main values. These I pretty much just laid in the midtones, and then you'll finish off with some highlights. Just get the basic shapes in there and colors. and it'll look pretty cool regardless. Of course, if your style is more realistic, you can tighten all of this up. I hope that you just have fun painting, even if it looks absolutely nothing like mine and wasn't intended to. At the very least, it's just inspiration for you to try something on your own.
Are you looking for more product advice and wisdom from me?
Or me?
Or me?
Hit that subscribe button or head over to thedesirecompany.com for more classes, how-tos, and reviews.